3, 2, 1. In case of extreme heat, break fragments of silicon.
Welcome to a special 4th of July edition of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam. Joining me is the regular crew. Forgive me if we seem a bit rushed, but we've got a lot to talk about. And we've got some time, but not all the time in the world. Anyway, Also, this is probably going to be a long interview because our guest this week is James Montagna of Wayforward.
Hi there.
Now, you have had a very long and storied career at Wayforward, from what I'm seeing here.
That's right.
But we'll get to that in a bit. But we'd like to start our interviews by asking the person in question how they got interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level.
Cool. All right. Well, I could speak to that a bit. So I'm James Montagna from Wayforward. I'm also making a lot of indie games, kind of as solo projects on the side. And as far as how I got started being interested in video games and game development, I would say that goes pretty far back. I made my first game when I was about 6 years old. So I barely learned how to use a computer, but as soon as I could get on the computer, I wanted to figure out how to make games. So that basically got started from just being a gamer since the age of 3. I played Super Mario Brothers on the original NES, and once I started playing that, I was immediately hooked. I only wanted to play video games for a very long time. It was just my favorite thing to do. And I can remember before I even knew how to use a computer, I would get out crayons and I would draw out what my game ideas were when I was just a little kid. So for me, this has been a lifelong thing. And when I was about 6 years old, I kind of started making things on a computer because my family got a personal computer. I still remember it. It was a Macintosh Performa, and there was a program called HyperCard where you could basically make simple card-based games. It was all monochrome, black and white, and you'd basically draw artwork and then have buttons that link to other scenes of artwork, and through that you could pretty much make very rudimentary games. And so that's kind of how I got my start personally making games. But as far as professionally, I didn't stop making games. I continued making games from that time when I was very young to when I was a teenager. I was still experimenting, and all my free time I spent just trying to make stuff and experiment and putting together games. And I'd even go as far as to when I was in junior high and elementary school, I would make games and burn them onto, because I guess the thing back then was, computers had CD burners. I would burn my games onto discs and give them to friends at school, or when I was feeling very much entrepreneurial, I would sell them to people. And that was sort of my start at sharing my work with the world. I started uploading my indie games on my website, and through the years, I sort of developed a portfolio of games. Not all of them were good. Not all of them were even complete, but I had a whole portfolio of games by the time I was about 20 years old. And at this point, I'm in college, and my college had set up a sort of a internship program with Wayforward, and I got to talking to the president of Wayforward, Way, and I showed him my portfolio of games, talked about sort of my background in games, and I guess they were impressed enough to hire me on board. And I've been at Wayforward for 11 years now, ever since.
That's a long time to be working anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Let's see. There's actually quite a bit to unpack here. Well, I suppose I should start asking about like the games you did, the indie games. What types of games, such.
Sure. Before Wayforward, right?
Yeah.
Cool. I can tell you a little bit about that. Okay, this is funny. I still remember my first game. It was called The Red Maze, and it was terrible. You could finish it in about all of 10 seconds. Um, so the reason I bring that up is not number one because it's funny, but number two because a lot of the games that I made early on were like not super great. I wasn't very experienced. I was entirely self-taught. However, I definitely had a lot of passion. So the games I was making back then, um, a lot of them were just to sort of amuse myself and amuse friends. But it wasn't until I started kind of entering like stuff like festivals, where I was kind of picking up steam and getting the hang of making, games that are actually decent. So some of those were games that debuted at festivals. Some of them were things that I made for classes. So I made an interactive storybook game in, I think it was like 2003, called Apple Tree Story. And after that, I made a game that uses only one button. That one was called Hazardous Heights. I'm trying to remember what else I did. And then in 2006, I made one called Sour Buddies, which I actually felt inspired to revisit later and create as a iOS and Android puzzle game. So all these games that I've been working on throughout the years, later in my career as a game designer, I might be pulling inspiration from. I should bring up another one called Xinvert, which is like a polarity swapping platformer game that I made for a festival called the Slam Dance Festival. I think that was like 2005 or so. And so I'd been working on all these games, but every single one of those games, later on, I'd be pulling different ideas and stuff from. However, one of them kind of stood out among the rest. I entered something called Gamma 256, which was a festival. Gamma stands for Game Arts Montreal, and they had a sort of like a dance party curated game art show slash installation. It's kind of weird, but they'd have basically games on projectors, nightclub music being pumped throughout, and you'd go and you'd play these little game experiences. And for Gamma 256, which is the second year out of I think 4 or 5 years they ran the Gamma Festival in Montreal, the theme for that one was bizarre screen resolution. So I made a game called Dodge Club, which was basically the name was a result of the only action in the game was dodging, and the entire game took place on a screen of 8 by 8 pixels. So it was the smallest resolution I could possibly fit a coherent game into, and the only thing you would do is you're a pixel and you're dodging another pixel, and then I'd have like a pixel sort of tracing the edge so that you wouldn't be able to like hide in a corner while you're trying to dodge the pixel that you're supposed to avoid. That ended up really taking off, and to this day, I'm still making Dodge Club games. Most recently, about 2 months ago, I released Dodge Club Pocket on Nintendo 3DS, completely outside of Wayforward. I work on that in my spare time, and yeah, so that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm working on outside of Wayforward work. And as far as what started before Wayforward, the list is too long to be very comprehensive, but those are some of the more notable ones.
Right. So how was it, developing an indie game in the early 2000s as opposed to now?
Well, I would definitely say that the scene has changed as far as indie games go. There's a lot more out there. As far as competition is concerned, there's more resources to learn how to make games. So in the early 2000s, the Unity didn't exist yet. You know, I was using like click and play to make stuff, you know, and now there's so many resources out there. There's tutorials, there's guides, there's, you know, so many different engines. It's easier than ever now to become an indie game developer and make your own game, because in the early 2000s those things didn't quite exist, at least not in the form that they do now. That being said, back then I think it was easier to make a splash with something because the market wasn't as saturated, so to speak.
I can definitely agree there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there are like literally thousands of games released on Steam and iOS and Android, and even the console stores are pretty crowded these days.
Yeah, it's true. I look on the App Store regularly to kind of see like what's new and what's coming in, or rather I did, until it got to the point where I just couldn't keep up with it because there was just so much new stuff. My backlog of games and experiences I wanted to have and play was growing to the point of not ever being able to catch up. And I think in the past 5 or so years, it's only grown exponentially. And it's continuing to grow for the foreseeable future. So I think games, well, they're not going anywhere. So there's that. But also, now it's easier than ever to get in. More and more people are making games. And I think we're still seeing people innovating and making things that have never been done before. So I think games still have a long way to go. And I personally hope that we'll continue to see lots of games all over the place. Even if it makes it kind of difficult to sort of break through in the market, I want to see games everywhere, personally.
I don't think that's a problem. It's like it's more how to get noticed in today's environment. Now, I don't know if like the subject of the Indiepocalypse has ever reached your shores, but it's a fairly frequent topic of conversation here, since we get a lot of indie devs on the program, and it's a deluge. Like, how do you get your game noticed if you don't have like the backing of, say, a publisher or something like that?
Right, it's tough. There's a few different ways to go about it traditionally. But that's changing all the time. Like, even in the past few years, that's changed. Nowadays, you're seeing a lot of people that, for instance, where applicable, one of the best things you can do for if you're a small indie developer and want to make a big splash is to give your game, like give download codes to Twitch streamers or influencers and have them stream and play the game so that other people can see it and their curiosity will be piqued and they'll go pick up the game, right? That's relatively new. Before that, it was like maybe carpet bombing review codes to review websites, hoping they'll pick it up. Sharing on forums. There's forums like a great one I know is TIG Source, which is a lot of indie developers there just kind of sharing their work. And I used to post there frequently back in the day. I believe it's still around. So that's the sort of things. I mean, there's a lot more than just that, but those are the things off the top of my head that I know people are doing to get the word out. But yeah, I haven't heard the term Indiepocalypse too much, but that's an interesting one. I can only assume that means just like there's a like overwhelming amount of indie games.
Yeah, it's
right?
like specifically in the context of Steam, there being just so many new games every day that it's almost impossible for anyone to get eyeballs on their, like, fresh eyeballs front page on their thing.
Right, I got you. Yeah, I mean that sounds about right. It's tough. I'm not the world's best marketer. Like I'm a game designer, I'm a creative, but as far as like getting the word out, I'll admit, even for myself, for my own indie works, it's tricky. It's very difficult. You know, when you don't have like a publisher, when you're self-published, you're just kind of trying to spread the word. It's not easy. Thankfully, when it comes to stuff like the Nintendo eShop, like recently, I released Dodge Club Pocket on Nintendo 3DS. But prior to that, I released a game called Dodge Club Party on the Wii U eShop, and before that, Dot Arcade on the Wii U eShop. All those kind of playing with a similar premise of like doing a game with a minuscule resolution, right? These are small games. They're small in scope, small in size. They're not expensive, and next to these big, epic Nintendo games on the eShop, it's hard to break through. But thankfully, when you're publishing on a store like that, usually if you build a relationship with the vendor, in this case, the eShop, the vendor is Nintendo, they're pretty good about helping indies out, and they'll do stuff like you can coordinate with them on, like, here's a week where they don't necessarily have anything to feature. Maybe they can put your game on the front page for a few days, right? That sort of thing. A lot of people don't even think to ask, but it can make a huge difference. In the Steam store, I know there's similar things. If you talk to them, sometimes they can coordinate something for you.
Right. And yeah, it's just space is limited, and like not every indie developer we've talked to has made it, or some of them have made it and then they did.
Yeah.
For some people, stuff works for, and some people just have a really hard time and can't get stuff to get any notice.
And on the other hand, if you do the closed circuits, well, then you have to get through the gates. The GOG is a pretty good example of that these days. There are games that buy there and they get rejected. And, I remember that happening to Steam way back about 6 years ago. Like, we had developers on here complaining about how hard it was to get their games to Steam. Yeah, I know it might be hard to believe in today's age, but that did happen.
Well, we also had developers who were super proud they were on Steam.
Yes.
Now, I could literally get on Steam if I just threw them, what is it, $100 now?
Pretty much. It's like Steam Direct. Like, if you pay the $100, yeah, you can put just about anything on the store. Granted, you're subject to their whims. See last week's episode for more on that.
Oh dear.
Visual novels. That's really all we need to go into with that one.
That being said, I do like I like myself a good visual novel. There is a lot of them, however. I know the Steam store, last time I checked, is overwhelmed with them. I have a few theories on why that is. They're probably a bit easier to create than some of the other genres of games that you might come across on the store, right? So I think that has a big part to do with the fact of why you're seeing visual novels. There's a lot of tools for them besides just doing something in Unity. There's stuff like RenP. There's like people. I know a lot of people like to prototype stuff out with like pen and paper, or like twine, and then or sticky notes even, right? Because they're just such like simple games sometimes, and they'll work with something like Tyranno Builder, Visual Novel Maker. No shortage of tools to do those sorts of games, and relatively sort of like low impact as far as budget to put those together. So that's my theory on why you're seeing a lot of those. I like them, but yeah, I agree. There's very many of them, so it's tough to stand out.
Grant, I couldn't really speak to that because, like, the visual novel people we know tend to handle they tend to translate the Japanese ones. They publish like some of the Western visual novels, but I don't think we've really talked to like a Western visual novel maker yet. So it's possible, but I couldn't speak to that. We're more talking about the whole. Visual novels are about to be purged for sexual content thing that happened not too long ago.
Oh, really? I'm actually not up on that, so I'll have to look into that.
like I said, just go listen to last week's episode. And
I think I will.
I'm like, John was not happy about the whole situation. Anyway, getting back on track here and kind of switching tracks over to Wayforward. What position did you first get at the company, and what was your first project?
The first day I started at Wayforward, they told me I would be working on Contra 4. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? I flipped.
Hold on, rewind. What are we doing?
Yeah, that was basically my reaction to that. Now, that was 11 years ago. I was really surprised, like, to be working on a franchise I grew up with, right? I played the original Contra on Nintendo. It's one of those games that I played when I was just a kid, So for me, that was my first project that I got started on. And the position I was in was actually an artist and later a level designer. Those were my kind of initial positions at the company. So in Contra 4, I was doing some animation. I was doing animation early on, and one of the things I animated in Contra 4, I still remember it. I was really sweating, and I was so nervous because it was like my first Wayforward assignment. I was animating running scared humans that would kind of be set dressing for the level, and it was one of my first major pixel animations. I'd done pixel animations before, but nothing to this degree, and I was so nervous about it, and it ended up being okay. I probably sweated it more than I had to, but it all worked out, and that's kind of how I started out. I was on projects contributing as a artist, animator, and then a bit later, I became a level designer.
And what art did you do for Contra 4?
So it was I was animating the scared people, and then I think for the Japanese localization of it, it was one of my first projects, right? So I was doing kind of the low-hanging fruit work. I was exporting Japanese text and comic sequences over the English ones, just kind of really basic work, not a lot of super creative stuff on that project. But as far as I was concerned, I was just honored to be a part of that early on and get to know the really talented folks behind these games that I was enjoying first as a fan, now on the other side.
Indeed. And were you in regular contact with Konami, or?
I personally wasn't on that project. It was more, I was one of the staff members at Wayforward, but I know that for us, we, as far as the leads on the project, we were working with Tom, who later ended up coming over to Wayforward. So it's kind of cool. From Konami, he came and he still works at Wayforward, which is actually really interesting and cool.
So do you know if Konami was pleased with the end product?
Not sure. I certainly hope so. I think I'm really proud of what we put together with that game. And I still like to go back and play that one from time to time. I'll tell you, it's tough as nails. I underestimated how difficult that game was when I played it. Actually, just a couple weeks ago, I dove back into that one. I hope they were proud of it as much as we were.
I couldn't venture a guess, but I remember getting Contra 4 Christmas 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, rather enjoying it. It's been a long time since I played Contra 4, so memories are kind of fuzzy. I do remember I did play it and enjoy it.
Cool. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think it's always nice to hear, even if it's a really old thing, that something that Wayforward was either working on or a part of brought somebody delight. I think that's why we do this. We're entertainers at the end of the day.
Well, Wayforward has done a lot of games. Not necessarily games that people might know all the time, but from my experience, they've been company's been pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, once again, there were games that were not in my interest range, like the American Dragon series, or just a lot of licensed stuff here.
Yeah, and the company does take on projects like that from time to time. We're thinking about all different audiences, right? Like we're all gamers, and we grew up playing games, and so I think for us, if we can look at each game, whether it's something original from Wayforward or if it's a licensed title, and put in the same sensibilities of fun, that seems to be the right approach for us.
That's good to hear, especially with the licensed titles. It can be hard to do that. I mean, we all know the stereotype of licensed titles,
right?
And, I will say Wayforward has bucked that trend a good portion of the time. Maybe not every time, but certainly I've heard of games like the Thor game you guys did was a lot better than the other Thor games, for example.
Oh.
I don't think I played that one, but
I actually did some level design on that one. Yeah, that one was directed by Austin Ivansmith, and who actually went on to direct like DuckTales Remastered. So that was one of his early projects. But I remember Thor. We were working on that one, and it was one of those things where we kind of I don't think we reinvented the wheel on it, but we used like the two screens in a really interesting way, if I remember correctly, where you're Thor and you're like you could jump between the two screens, and it ended up being a lot of fun. And so I think those sensibilities, we try to bring them to even our licensed games. It's tough sometimes. Every game has a particular set of conditions and constraints that in the end the players on the other side might not ever even know about, right? There's particular restrictions on like what we can do with particular intellectual properties and that sort of thing. But for us, the goal really is to just create a great product, create something that'll be fun and memorable. And as I said, we treat all of our games with the same attention to detail, whether it's original or licensed.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good ethos to have, especially since, once again, when it comes to licensed games, for various reasons, they are considered to be sub-products. But anyway, so what did you work on after Contra?
Let's see. Quite a few different games. Early on, I was jumping from project to project, doing stuff like menus and UI, art design, and stuff like level design, as I mentioned. But one of the major ones after that, a bit later on, was the A Boy and His Blob game for Wii, which was actually I don't know if you're familiar with the original Nintendo game, but this was sort of I don't want to say remake, because we didn't just remake the NES game, but it was like a reimagining or a reboot, if you will, of this original NES game. I think it was like David Crane's A Boy and His Blob. And so we worked with Majesco on that one. And that was my first project as a level designer. And that's kind of where I started really getting my design chops professionally. That was a really great project, actually.
Yeah.
We actually reviewed that, last year?
Yeah, I think it was
before.
Last year.
The PC release.
Yeah, I think they decided to revisit it and do like a PC release of it not too long ago, which was really exciting for me, because then a whole new audience of players could enjoy it,
Yeah, like we know the people who ported that.
Right on, cool.
Games, so all sorts of connections. But yeah, I remember liking the A Boy and His Blob remake or reimagining or whatever sort of designation you want to give it.
It's very cute.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was like one of many games that I would go on to be involved with, as far as after doing Contra 4. There was A Boy and His Blob. I worked on the Batman, the Brave and the Bold game, which was I did the level designs on the Nintendo DS version. So we actually had a Wii and a DS version. And this one was really cool because you could actually, they were different games, both developed in-house by Wayforward, but for completely different consoles. But the great thing about them was if you had the DS game, you could actually do a special mode where it would connect to the Wii game, and you'd be able to control using the DS something in the Wii game. It was like Batmite mode, and there's a character called Batmite in that particular series, and you've got this little Batmite character, and you're basically messing around making platforms and stuff, and it was no one else was doing that sort of thing at the time, so it was really cool to think of that and sort of like what kind of clever things you could do with this sort of setup. So I think that kind of just reinforces the idea that even if it's a licensed title, we're trying to find ways to innovate and just really surprise and delight people. So yeah, that was one we worked on after that, and I'm trying to think. There's just so many. It's hard to think off the top of my head, actually.
Well, I mean, looking at these credits here, I see like the Shantae's Risky Revenge and Mighty Milky Way.
Oh yes, that's right. Mighty series is an interesting one. That started out with Mighty Flip Champs on the DSi store, and then we wanted to kind of keep it going and do another like so-called Mighty game. We were thinking, okay, we'll make it like a series, right? And the second game, we were kind of really sort of feeling out because whatever we did in the second game and also called it Mighty would sort of like drive the hand for the future, right? So Mighty to me personally means, something that's pick up and play, one really strong hook, and then taking that hook to its extremes, right? And so
simple puzzle like concept, but then go nuts with the execution.
Yeah, that's a very Nintendo philosophy.
And of course, Nintendo's an enormous influence for us. So I have no doubt that would be considered like a Nintendo philosophy, right? And so Mighty Milky Way was, I think, one of the first original IPs that I kind of helped develop and was a part of, and I was a co-director on that one. And that was a really cool game. That was like a simple DSiWare puzzle game. I'm always surprised when people remember it, but just really happy because that was a really just fun sort of creative exercise of a project. And and that was just before I kind of got to work on Shantae. And so I was working on, or was it before or after? Damn, my timeline's getting a little confused because there's just so much that happened during that time, including like that was also around when Thor. We were working on that. We worked on Where the Wild Things Are, that game on DS. There's just so much, and that at that point, I kind of think it was just me getting started on being a designer still because I was working on a Boy in His Blob. But the Shantae series started before my time at Wayforward, so I can talk about that a little bit. That was started. The first one came out on Game Boy Color in 2002, and of course, plans for that game date back into the mid '90s. So I knew about that game already coming into Wayforward. I'd already played the game. I was a fan of the game. So for me to be a part of it, the way I was at the time and the way I am today, truly an honor, right? But yeah, Risky's Revenge was the first one that I kind of got to be a part of, and I sort of it's my first time working closely with the creative director Wayforward, Matt Bozon, also the series creator for Shantae, and it went really well. It was just a great project. It was a great learning experience, and there was some magic there that I think we've kept going ever since.
And what was it like working on the original properties versus the licensed stuff?
Funny enough, it's not all that different because we're putting the same sort of energy and passion into it, no matter if it's licensed or not. But I will say personally, there's a certain spark of fun in creating something all new. As much as I absolutely adore being a part of working on a existing brand, especially if it's a brand that I personally have a lot of love for, I grew up with. Like I directed a SpongeBob game, and it was basically like a SpongeBob WarioWare-esque game, and I I grew up watching SpongeBob, right? So for me, it was really special. But I have to say, there's something very fun about creating something all new, or if it's original, the flexibility that you get to come up with all new things. So that's sort of what I would say is like the difference between them. But as far as like the effort we put in, it's it's very much similar.
That is an interesting difference, and not unexpected, since with original IP, Wayforward gets to dictate what to do at all times, versus licensed IP that you have to stay in parameters.
Yeah, it's like on one hand you don't have anybody else telling you what you can and you can't do with the characters. On the other hand, you've got yourself always wondering what you should and shouldn't do with the characters.
That's true. You kind of have to be your own like IP guide, right? I remember there was a project. I think we were working on a Hello Kitty game at one point, and Sanrio was just very particular about how particular characters could be portrayed, and I still remember that to this day because they have brand guidelines. So when you're doing an original game, those constraints, the restrictions are off, but in a way that's even more daunting, because now it's like, okay, you are the gatekeeper. You're establishing what is this IP, where does it go, right?
Yeah, because I don't think people would be very happy if Shantae suddenly pulled out a Glock.
No, flintlocks only.
To be fair, she did have a pistol in Pirate's Curse.
That's why I specifically said a Glock.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Anyway, so when did you graduate to the director's chair?
That was in 2010, and somewhere in the blend of Mighty Milky Way and SpongeBob is when I started directing, and it was great to be able to kind of finally express what I always knew was the role I wanted to do, which is design and direct games, right? So that was about the time when I became a director after years of being artist, animator, level designer, especially, and it was really challenging at first because I'd never directed a game and with like a professional team. I'd made and completed games on my own. I've worked as part of the team, but I never helmed a project, been the leader of a group of artists, animators, programmers, audio engineers, composer. I'd never had that experience before, so it was challenging, but it's one of the things that after you've done it a few times, you kind of get the hang of it. You know how to solve problems, and you learn that communication is key.
Yeah, I can sort of connect there, since that on a much smaller scale, that's how things work here. But what was your first game as a director, if you can remember?
Let's see. I think the SpongeBob game and Milky Way are tied, which is interesting because one is an original IP and one is a licensed game. Those came out around the same time, and I was working on them kind of one after the other. I co-directed Mighty Milky Way, and then I solely directed SpongeBob. It was called SpongeBob Squiggle Pants, and it was published by THQ, and it's available on Wii. Sorry, it was a U-Draw game on Wii. So if you had the U-Draw game tablet, you could play it. But it's actually still available on Nintendo 3DS. I don't know if it's on the eShop, but it can be found on like Amazon. If you like WarioWare, that game was so fun to work on, and it was definitely like a WarioWare inspired game. That was my first game as a director. So if you want to see like what I was doing early on, it's for me, it's a little tough to look back on, because every time you finish a game, it's like, oh, I wish I could have fixed this or that. But there's something also kind of like fun from the sense of like looking at baby pictures, right? That would have been my first game as director. After that, I was still working on Shantae Risky's Revenge and helping with that one as a designer. And after that, I worked on the Silent Hill Book of Memories on PlayStation Vita, also a Konami game. And one of the bigger, and I was a was like a co-director on that one. I don't know formally what my title was. I think it was like gameplay director. So that Silent Hill was kind of cool to be a part of that series. Another one I kind of played as a teenager. But one of the bigger ones that I directed, like it's a major title, was the first Adventure Time game based on the Cartoon Network series Adventure Time.
That was Why'd You Steal Our Garbage?
Yeah, yes, it was called. The full title is Adventure Time. Hey, Ice King, why'd you steal our garbage?
That is a very Adventure Time title.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to admit, we didn't come up with that name. The people in charge of that IP did. Maybe Pendleton Ward himself did. I'm not sure, but yeah, when they told us that that's what they wanted to call the game, well, first of all, it was a riot. We were laughing. We were really happy about it, but we were also like, that's so Adventure Time, isn't it?
Yeah, and for those who haven't played this particular Adventure Time game, it's basically an homage to Zelda 2.
Right. So I can tell you a little bit about how that came about. Pendleton Ward is the series creator for Adventure Time, and he's just like a really chill, cool guy. And when we got to talking with him early on in this sort of like beginning of working on this game, we started just kind of geeking about our influences and like talking about like, hey, like I grew up playing this, playing that. And one of the major ones that we both had in common, which I felt was a bit of an obscure choice, was Zelda 2. That was a game that I personally played as a kid and then would revisit from time to time. But a lot of people are hard on that game because it is sort of like a break from the formula, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that particular case, the fact that we both sort of like resonated with this one obscure, as far as Zelda games go, obscure Zelda games, we knew at that moment that that's the direction that we had to take this new Adventure Time game in.
Now that is interesting. And yeah, it's a game worth playing, I'll say.
Okay, thank you.
I always kind of looked at that at GameStop, and I never actually grabbed it, but I kind of wish I had.
Admittedly, I liked it better than the other Adventure Time game. I don't know.
Right, yeah, that was the.
Oh yeah,
that
explore
was
the
second
dungeon
one.
because I don't know.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think Wayforward worked on that one as well.
Yeah, we were involved with that one too. I think different
one's like a
different
roguelike,
team
right?
entirely. Yeah, that was a different team and sort of like different circumstances, different schedules. So yeah, I can't speak too much to that one. I wrote some dialogue for that one, so I was like kind of involved, but not to the level of the first game. So the first game, Hey Ice King, was that Zelda 2 one. It was meant to be, as far as the series goes, the first Adventure Time game ever. I think at that point they had maybe like an iOS sort of like one-off. You could finish it in maybe about 10 minutes at best. But this was like the first major Adventure Time game. So it was really delightful and cool to make something like that and be a part of that brand. And to this day, I look back on that project and it's one of my personal favorites, most special things I've been able to be involved in, just because there's so much passion behind it. In the end, it's a pretty short game. You can finish it in a sitting. You know, we're being mindful of the audience that it's being made for, so it's not super difficult, though there is a new game plus mode if you're so inclined. You play through the game again, a bit more challenging. But yeah, I think all things considered, just a really special project.
Well, did you do any writing on Ice King?
I did, yeah. So basically, it was Pendleton and I kind of tag teaming the dialogue. I watched so much Adventure Time that in my mind I can hear the voices of the characters and kind of channel that into the text, you know. And of course, Penn, it's his thing. So between the two of us, we were using AOL Instant Messenger at the time and just kind of like late nights passing back and forth like ideas like, hey man, check this out, like wouldn't it be stupid if they said this? And it's like, LOL, okay, put it in, you know. That's literally how this got done. So it was the two of us sort of tag teaming the writing for the entire game.
Right. I mean, Did you ever step back from that and get like amazed that you were working with the creator of Adventure Time?
Yeah, it was pretty surreal. I will admit. We did a signing together at GameStop when the game came out, and it was just one of the highlights of my career to that point, to be able to sit next to him and sign these copies of the game and see just the delight on people's faces when they're looking forward to playing, and knowing that they were going to dive into this insane experience that we'd put together for them. Yeah, it's surreal. It's awesome.
I can imagine. Like, did that ever feel intimidating?
Yeah, I had breakdowns sometimes. I get nervous that I'd get imposter syndrome. Well, dang, man, am I good enough for this? Can I do this? It happens. It happens to the best of us. And yeah, it's intimidating sometimes. But when I really kind of take a view at the whole thing and see what we were able to put together, I can look back on it and be really proud of it. No project is flawless. And I think people don't always realize this, but the people that are going to be more critical on a game than anybody are the people that made it. They're the ones that know it inside out. They know its flaws. They know what they wanted to do but couldn't because of either time or budget constraints or what have you. And so I think a lot of people are like afraid to tell someone that made a game like, oh, that one wasn't my favorite. But I think more often than not, some people will be like, oh my God, I know, if only we could have done like this, and this, right? And usually they're on the same page. So I just want to get that out there, because this is one of those like things that like people don't seem to inherently know about this craft. Like, yeah, we know what's up. We know something's like under par, but like or not up to par, I think I should say. But I think there's a lot to be proud of in this particular one. I know it's not perfect, but I still adore it to this day, and I'm really glad to have been a part of that, even through the difficult times where I wasn't sure about things and it was tricky, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm like, it's not a story that's unique. Like, we've heard that before from other people. So we can certainly understand, even if I don't think anyone here has had any like development experience currently. But we do absorb the stories we're given on a weekly basis.
Yeah, so you can relate in that regard. Like, you're like, oh yeah, it's a common thing with developers, and I believe you, it is.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway, I kind of want to backtrack to the Silent Hill game, since.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Silent Hill, major franchise, and I believe Book of Memories was the last Silent Hill game to date.
Yeah, I think that was the last Silent Hill game that came out. So I was the gameplay director on the most recent Silent Hill game to come out, unless you count PT, aka Silent Hills. I don't know if that counts, but yeah, unless you count that, Silent Hill Book of Memories, as far as I know, I could be mistaken, is the most recent one.
It's like PT never was a completed thing. I mean, there was the demo, but
it's exactly what it says it was. It was a playable teaser for Silent Hills.
Right.
So yeah, the Silent Hills,
and now it doesn't exist. So
yeah, never happened.
Except on a very few PlayStation consoles.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it is the most recent Silent Hill game that exists in its entirety.
kind of a strange one to think about, but yeah, I suppose that's true, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually spoken to other people who've worked on Silent Hill games. Like,
it's kind of a shame, but
yeah,
as expected of Konami.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the later Silent Hill games were kind of variable in quality, let's say.
I can tell you my personal favorite, Silent Hill 2, and I don't know that any of the other ones kind of lived up to the magic of Silent Hill 2, because I still remember the experience of playing that game and just how freaked out I was. And to that point in my life, I'd never played a game that made me feel those emotions. Like there's so much about it. The way it was put together, just such a beautiful game and terrifying, right? So yeah. That's personally my favorite one.
Well, yeah, Team Silent had a craft with survival horror that's still unmatched to this day. You know, it's just they disbanded after Silent Hill 3 or 4, and well, I can tell you what happened with Silent Hill after that. Silent Hill got moved over to Konami US because it was more popular here. That's why Western developers started taking.
Yeah, I think that's about my understanding of it too, and a lot of that might have to do with just tastes, like internationally.
Mm-hmm. We spoke to Climax about their Silent Hill games last year, I think.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they were the one. I think they did Silent Hill Homecoming, and they did Shattered Memories, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Okay, I actually enjoyed both of those personally.
Yeah, they had a lot of fun working on that. And anyway, getting back to Book of Memories here, what is a gameplay director, and what did you have to shepherd on this?
It's tricky to pinpoint exactly what someone would do from that title alone, because I don't know that it's necessarily like a real title or a common title. However, I can tell you personally, my roles were things such as balancing out the invisible stuff to the player, like the kind of the RPG element stuff, making sure that things escalated and ramped carefully, which is very difficult in this sort of like randomly generated game, right? Figuring out like item stats, figuring out stuff like, oh gosh, the timing on move animations, like when you're throwing a punch, how many frames before it connects. When you're using this weapon, like how quickly, like is there an anticipation where if let's say I've got like a hammer, the anticipation like of wind up before it attacks, like how many frames of that, and tweaking everything to feel right. So things like when an enemy attacks you, it's not like they attack you so quick you couldn't react. They need to have some sort of tell or antic before. Right. So that anticipation will show you, okay, I need to either block or move out of the way. Stuff like that. I was working on a lot of the kind of nitty gritty. I wasn't coming up with the whole concept for the game itself so much as supporting the inner workings of the game. I did have fun coming up with stuff like what items might appear and what kind of charms you start the game off with and things like that. And for that sake, it was a lot of like playing through the games again, researching the brand and game lore, which I was already fairly familiar with. And yeah, that's kind of what my role was, which, gameplay director is kind of a big term, but that sort of would seem to encapsulate it.
Right, and another question is, do you know how Wayforward got attached to a Silent Hill game? It's not exactly a franchise or a series that I would associate with what Wayforward usually does.
Yeah, that's understandable. We actually do a very wide variety of games in all sorts of different genres, and I think it's shocking because of the fact that a lot of people associate us with stuff like Shantae, Mighty Switch Force. Understandably, we love all games, and we have staff here that loves all different genre of games. And for us, being able to work on a Silent Hill game was like a dream property, right? And I think we even were during the Kickstarter campaign for Shantae Half-Gene Hero, we were showing some prototypes and stuff, and we showed like a DS Silent Hill prototype that we'd pitched to Konami years before Book of Memories was even a thing. So for us, we were thinking about it, like it might be shocking to people outside, but for us, it seemed logical. We were thinking about doing this sort of thing for a very long time. So the opportunity to finally be a part of that series felt right and was really special to us to be able to do that. And of course, to this day, we still do games that have sort of the horror, creepy aesthetic, if you will, like Till Morning's Light. My buddy Adam Tierney was the director of that one. That one was with Amazon Game Studios, and that it's a little bit more playful, but definitely in the same sort of like horror wheelhouse, right?
Right. Sure. Like, I guess not familiar with that one offhand. No. But anyway, so were you at all concerned that Wayforward would be able to get across the horror of Book of Memories, or especially given that it's a very different game than your usual Silent Hill fare?
Me personally, I was kind of just going with the flow. This was the project I'm on. I'm doing the best I can to balance out the gameplay and make it feel good. So I don't think my head was in that so much as like I'm trying to make the best game possible in the parameters that exist, which I believe is established by the directive that came from Konami themselves, right?
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Like, I haven't played this one since I never owned a Vita, like, which is a common refrain, unfortunately. Like,
oh, okay.
Yeah, well, the Vita didn't exactly do the best over here, which is unfortunate. Like, I'm not sure if that had anything to do with Book of Memories being like the last Silent Hill game, but you know, that'd be like a question from the economics equation, I guess. Anyway, so what came after these projects?
So after, what did we just talk about? We talked about Silent Hill Book of Memories. We also talked a little bit about Adventure Time, right? So
yes.
From a timeline perspective, I think the next project would have been something like, gosh, we did, had Mighty Switch Force 2. I guess later on, I worked on a game called Wonder Momo with Bandai Namco, which was a really special and cool game. However, it's not available currently anymore. So that one, but that was a cool little project. That was sort of a remake, not a remake, another like reimagining, if you will, of a classic 1987 arcade game from Japan, also known as Wonder Momo. And so we were working with a division of Bandai Namco called Shifty Look, which was sort of revitalizing what they refer to as sleeping IP. So these are classic IP that haven't seen a game for a while, therefore sleeping, right? And the Shifty Look initiative was to sort of revitalize, revive, and do things with them, not just games, sometimes, a lot of times, in fact, webcomics, and other cases doing cartoons, anime, and just other interesting projects. Like I remember this one called Namco High, which was very funny, sort of silly dating sim with Namco characters. That was part of the Shifty Look initiative, and that was a really cool project to work on. However, Shifty Look, as a subsidiary of Bandai Namco, was shuttered at the end of the project, so the game only ever had a very limited release, unfortunately.
Yeah, I kind of remember Shifty Look. Like, I remember there was like a Wonder Momo anime thing, but
True.
I don't remember hearing about an actual like game. So
yeah, unfortunately, it was hard to get the word out about it because of the circumstances, and truth be told, I don't really know the details of why Bandai Namco decided to close Shifty Look or the business side of it. I just know we worked on that game. It was a really special and cool project. I would say look it up like on YouTube or something like that if you want to learn more about this game that kind of never got to reach its full potential because of reasons outside of our control. And that's a subject in itself. Sometimes things happen in game development. Games sometimes get canceled. Things happen outside of our control. Sometimes it's really sad. Sometimes it's very frustrating. Sometimes it's, you work on a project for a while, especially some indie projects. It happens sometimes where we work on something and then it kind of, sometimes it falls apart and never gets to see the light of day. But the best you can do is funnel your efforts into whatever is next.
Right. And exactly where was Wonder Momo Typhoon Booster released?
It was available on the Mac App Store and NVIDIA Shield as a console. That's it. we didn't get around to releasing it on any other platforms because of the result of the situation.
I'm like, yeah, to speak frankly here, I'm not surprised that the word didn't get out if those were the only platforms.
Right? Yeah, I hear you.
It's nothing against, say, like the Macintosh or the NVIDIA Shield. It's just, yeah, it's, it's not the 3DS. It's not the PC. It's not,
Yeah,
they're not exactly popular platforms.
true.
That is unfortunate.
Right, and that's that's games development. It can be really heartbreaking sometimes, but we love what we do, and we just keep going.
Mm-hmm. Like, and what came after?
So Wonder Momo, that was a really great title to work on as director, and it kind of like got me ready for a lot of stuff that was next. There's a lot of little interesting one-offs that kind of happened after that, so I can tell you a bit about those. We made a game that was essentially, let's see, I'm trying to think like timeline-wise. We did a Mighty Switch Force game that was based on Mighty Switch Force 2 a little bit, but it was like a puzzler for iOS called Mighty Switch Force Hose It Down. And funny enough, I could be mistaken on this. I'm not sure, but I think up to that point in time, it became Wayforward's most downloaded game, and that's huge, right? Like the most downloaded game. How? Well, that game was featured by Apple on the App Store as like a free download, like on the front page for the span of maybe either a couple days to a week. So it's kind of this low-key project that we wanted to do to sort of like try something out that inadvertently really sort of blew up in an interesting way. And so that was a cool little project to work on after Wonder Momo was finished. And that, I believe, is still available to this day on both the App Store, Google Play, and Steam as well. We did a PC release of it. So it's like kind of a, if I had to describe it, I'd say it's like a pipe puzzle game where you're using, you're moving sliding pipes around to link them up and channel water in different directions to put out fires.
Mm-hmm.
Simple and cool little game. I was really delighted to work on it and design puzzles for that one. It's designing puzzles is one of the just little simple joys as a game designer that I personally really take a lot of satisfaction in. So that was a really special project. And
Yeah,
let's see, yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of pipe dreams and BioShock.
Yes, that came up so many times. Definitely.
And I also see that you were an assistant director on Shantae and the Pirate's Curse.
So yeah, that would be the next major one. So at that point in time, it'd been a while since we released Shantae Risky's Revenge. We did Shantae Risky's Revenge Director's Cut, but after we finished Adventure Time, we had this sort of 2D platforming experience on 3DS to sort of look at as like a template of sorts and try something new, and the time just seemed right to do a new Shantae game. And I remember getting the email. It said, we're going to start production on Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. And I remember being like, ooh, what is that? What does Matt have in mind for this one? And immediately I was excited with the possibilities of this new direction for the game. It's the first Shantae game where she doesn't have her animal transformations. I thought, ooh, that's interesting. How's that going to play out? And so I became an assistant director on that project. And I was involved during most of the span of the entire project. I was on that one. Maybe I think there's one or two short stints where I was off on doing something else. But for the most part, I was very deeply involved with that one, designing labyrinths and just kind of doing design stuff and supporting the development of that game. And let me tell you, man, that was one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on.
Was there something in particular that made it one of your favorites, or was just the overall experience?
Good question. Maybe a little both. I had just a great time. Overall experience-wise, I had a great time just working on this game. Really talented staff at Wayforward, awesome team. just so much passion behind it. I remember everyone was really into what we were doing, and it really helps so much when everyone's got that spirit and they're ready to come in, they're happy to work on something, and just I think the results are different when you have a team that's like that versus a team that's kind of like, I don't see this too often at Wayforward, but I hear about just like teams that are kind of coming in like, oh, it's a living, It wasn't so much the case here where we had everyone just in lockstep, knowing what we wanted to make, really passionate about it. So I would say, and sometimes working really late nights just to do cool stuff like, oh man, like we're running up on this deadline, but wouldn't it be cool if we had like a secret labyrinth in the game and it was like me and Matt staying late, like, all right, whatever, let's just do it, right? And so we'll stay late into the night and like work really hard on it just to push it just a little bit further, right? I would say that's one of the things that made it really special. And just the end result of the game, it's personally the type of game that I love to play, and to be able to create that experience for players was just a real joy.
No doubt, no doubt. How was it like working on like how do I put this? Like a fuller experience than say Risky's Revenge. Nothing against that game, but it was kind of constrained by the DSI parameters.
Yeah, the data size limit for downloadable games.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Risky's Revenge is what it is as a result of the limitations of the platform, and we really tried to push the limits of what we could do on that platform. And I'm proud of what we were able to put together, but it's a shorter experience, to be fair, right? So in comparison, Pirate's Curse was a more full experience. Definitely, it's a bit intimidating to take on a project like that. However, I feel like this was the size and scope that we wanted to do. This is the sort of experience that we wanted to deliver to players, and I don't think there's any doubt in our mind that this was exactly like the experience that we wanted to make. I don't remember us cutting any major stuff. Like I feel like Pirate's Curse is very true to the experience that we're hoping to give to players, and that's why personally it's my favorite Shantae game.
It's mine too. I think nothing. I mean, I know that animal dances is sort of part of Shantae's thing, and
sure,
it was unusual to not have those. But I feel like in the Pirate's Curse, not having to shift forms to use any of the abilities you get is really useful for backtracking, and it makes backtracking and exploration more fluid.
I agree, yes.
Well, it's also, I liked Pirate's Curse because the animal transformations kind of broke the flow of gameplay, like, versus Risky here.
Yeah, it was consciously a different approach. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, Alex, go.
I was gonna say I've only played the first Shantae a little, and I really could never get the timing down on the dancing. So,
the Game Boy Color one, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Risky's Revenge was easier, but they were a little bit less. I mean, they were fewer, and they were not as. It felt like they were less integral somehow.
Yeah, so I was going to say it was a conscious decision on our part for Pirate's Curse to be a more fast-paced game. So you've got this pirate gear, and I remember we wanted you to feel really powerful as you gradually collected more and more gear. Like you've got like the pistol, and you've got the scimitar, you got the boots, the hat. As you get them, the sense of progression and the feeling of empowerment was very important for that game. We wanted you to feel gradually empowered as you play through the game, and having those at immediate disposal was a huge part of that feeling of growth and empowerment as you play through the game, right? So that was a conscious decision. Other ones, we wanted to be more methodical. When you look at Risky's Revenge, it's like, okay, I see a puzzle, how do I solve it? I think I'll boom, transform into this, try it out. Different sort of gameplay rhythm. I don't think there's one right or wrong. There's definitely, people have preferences, and they fulfill different needs, right? But as far as Pirate's Curse is concerned, I agree. I personally really enjoy that one, and I'm pleased to know you feel the same.
And I don't know, were you surprised that Pirate's Curse made it to the cover of like one of the last Nintendo Powers ever?
Yeah, I almost forgot about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, well, for us, that was huge. That was like wow, it's truly an honor to be a part of that publication. Certainly something that almost for the entire lifespan of that magazine, I was a subscriber. And yeah, that was truly an honor. And thank you for bringing that up. I almost completely forgot about that. So that was a really important thing for us as a company and the Pirates Curse team. It was very encouraging to have that, and very sad to know that very soon after that they stopped working on that particular magazine. But it's yeah, I look back on that very fondly.
Indeed. I think it was like the last issue was promoting New Super Mario Brothers U.
Yeah, and they did a cover that was like a remake of the first cover ever, I think.
Oh, I recall that.
the
Yeah,
last
that was
one.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Like, and now, did you have any involvement in like the porting of Pirate's Curse?
Yes, yeah. We brought Shantae and the Pirates Curse. Originally, it was for Nintendo 3DS.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I still feel like that's the best platform to play it on because I love 3D. I love 3D effects. I love the 3DS screen. I know it's not for everybody, but it's definitely for me. I totally dig it. And so when I was making each room in Pirate's Curse, working on the labyrinth, I was thinking about the feeling of depth and the like sometimes I would like throw a background really far into Z space so a place would feel really expansive, and other times I'd want you to feel kind of cramped, so I'd bring it really in close to the glass, right? That's all lost on every other version of the game. Not to mention I personally engineered a technique to be able to paint 3D depth into the character portraits. So if you're playing on the Nintendo 3DS version of Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, when the character portraits come in, when characters are talking and speaking dialogue, you can actually see some like 3D depth on their bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a really cool touch. In the end, it came out very nicely. These are touches that are all lost on any other version of the game. So personally, I have to like urge players, if you play Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, please consider the Nintendo 3DS version of the game my favorite version. That being said, it's available on many other different platforms, including most recently it's on Nintendo Switch, which is really cool to be able to bring that to like a new Nintendo console. So I was involved with bringing that initially to Wii U and PC, and part of that was putting in the upscaled character portraits artwork, like the high definition versions of the artwork, and then here and there like the menus in the HUD. I had to kind of do like high definition versions of the menus that we initially made only with Nintendo 3DS in mind, right? And I had made the 3DS one, so it was logical for me to kind of go in and do the high resolution ones. Yeah, so that was part of the process of porting it.
Was it a difficult task bringing these assets to HD, or were they like originally HD and you had to downscale?
It actually really varies. So in the case of that's a great question. In the case of the character portrait artwork, they were drawn HD initially, brought down to 3DS scale, and then depth painted into them. The depth didn't matter anymore, so we could actually kind of go back to the source art, take that art, and just use that as the. It had to be scaled a little bit, if I remember correctly, but we were able to use that as the character artwork. However, with stuff like the menus, those menus were made at 3DS scale, and the HUD elements on screen, 3DS scale. I remember the bottom screen item stuff was made really tiny. So what I had to go and do was pick those individual elements out, scale them up, and then kind of repaint or just fix them up so they would look good at the proper resolution. So that was a little tricky. All in all, maybe just a couple of weeks worth of work, but yeah, that was part of the process of porting that game.
Was that a difficult process, or was it fairly easy?
It wasn't any more difficult than anything else in particular, but as far as the technical side of it, I can't speak to that so much, but we have a really talented staff, amazing programmers that were able to get it up and running on consoles very quickly. And I remember just being so surprised at how quickly we had it running on not 3DS, you know. So that was actually a really great experience to be able to see this game that we've been working on like a 3DS screen for the first time in big blocky pixels on the TV, you know.
Right, right. Was there any plans to use the Wii U gamepad in conjunction with Pirate's Curse?
Our thoughts were we wanted to deliver an experience that was authentic to the original Nintendo 3DS version. That being said, we wanted to take advantage of the Wii U's unique capabilities. Therefore, what we went ahead and did was make it so that you could play on the TV and have your items on the Wii U gamepad screen, which is very similar in approach to how you would play on the 3DS with the touchscreen having your items.
on the touchscreen menu, which is one of the things that is hardest to adjust to about the Switch for me.
For
Not-
the
not-
Wii, the
not
Wii U or
having-
the Switch?
from the Switch, from the Wii U and 3DS to the Switch, not having a second screen. menu
Got
and
you.
stuff.
Yeah, I've heard a few people say something similar. It's a bit of an adjustment to no longer have that. You get used to that little bottom extra screen space, right? So for us, we wanted to have it so you could play with the Wii U gamepad having your items, but also some people like to do the off TV play for the Wii U. I remember, so we wanted to be able to be sure to support being able to play it with just the Wii U gamepad screen. So that was sort of our thoughts behind it. But we didn't go through any great lengths to do anything Wii U specific besides being sure that a player could have that experience.
That makes sense. You don't want to change it too much, or else it becomes a different game. Really.
True. Yep.
Anyway, in regards to the older Shantae titles, is there any chance that Risky's Revenge or the original might come to the Nintendo Switch?
Gosh, I don't know. Is that something you'd like to see?
Yeah, like just to have like all the Shantae games in one place. Like I guess technically the Wii U, but you know, once again, no disrespect to the Wii U, but on a console that people own.
Yeah,
And I got my Kickstarter codes for Half Genie Hero on the Wii U.
Oh, did you? I love the Wii U personally. I have to say, it's a great platform. It didn't live to its full potential, and I know sales wise it underperformed, but I gotta admit personally, I love it. I think it's a great console. I love the form factor. I love the for lack of a better term, I love like the gimmick of it. I enjoy it personally. It's a bit of a shame it didn't live to its full potential, but yeah, I know a lot of people played Shantae Half Gene Hero specifically on Wii U.
Well, it's not just a matter of like potential, but I'm just talking like sales. It is Nintendo's worst selling console ever. Not counting like the Virtual Boy.
Virtual Boy, right? Which I also love, incidentally. So I don't know what that says about me.
I'm not talking about how good or bad a console is. I'm just talking about the raw numbers. And,
I got you.
It's just Shantae is a series I've enjoyed quite a bit.
Thank you.
And the more people that can play it, the better.
Well, I'll definitely pass your words along as far as seeing the classic games be playable, and yeah, personally, I think that'd be pretty neat too.
Yeah. Anyway, now, did you do any work on Half Genie Hero?
I did, yes. So for that one, it's kind of funny. There's a little bit of overlap, and by that I mean we were still working on finishing up Pirate's Curse when Half Genie Hero got started. And we wrapped up Pirate's Curse, and I think I went on to work on some other stuff.
Right.
Not the least of which was Wonder Momo. And then after that, I was freed up and able to work on different stuff. So I joined the Shantae Half Genie Hero team, having been sort of like a legacy member of the Pirate's Curse crew and the Risky's Revenge crew. I'd been pretty involved in the series at this point, so it makes perfect sense to kind of keep me in that, to sort of keep driving the series forward with Matt and the rest of the team. So I joined a bit later, but that was definitely something where I was able to help out and sort of influence the design of that game in ways too.
Right, and this might be out of your purview, but two questions I've been always wondering about Half Genie Hero is what made Wayforward choose to do like the full console experience this time around, and why did they go to Kickstarter? Um,
Those are valid questions. As far as the full console experience, I think it's just something we always wanted to do, but we didn't have the means to do it. Doing a full-fledged big
Right.
console game, it's
Yeah.
tricky. You know, we always wanted to do it, so for us, it just made perfect sense. Like, here's the game we've always wanted to make, and up until then, you'd be at the mercy of publishers that are willing to take a risk on your game.
Mhm.
And it's, you know, and sometimes publishers have particular, they'll have conditions about the game. This is the type of thing we'd need the freedom to make by our own sort of decisions, right? And so it seemed kind of like just the right timing and the right opportunity when we saw about game crowdfunding and how it was making a difference for smaller developers to be able to achieve things that they couldn't previously. We wanted to try that out, and so we looked into it. We talked about it for a long time. The timing just felt right. The opportunity just felt right, and the demand was there. And we're so thankful for all these backers that helped create this project alongside us.
Indeed. I'm guessing that if it weren't for Kickstarter, Half Genie Hero would not exist.
It's hard to say, but definitely as a result of the Kickstarter campaign, we were able to make this game. I don't know what would have happened eventually, but definitely the game that we see today would not exist if it weren't for the backers that supported us and believed in us and saw this thing and said, hey, let's make this happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Granted, I do remember like our executive producer grumbling about how long Half Genie Hero was taking at a certain point. Because games take a while.
they do.
Well, I think Half Genie Hero, because it got so many stretch goals, that probably increased the amount of time it took.
That's true. Yeah, here's the thing. When you're Kickstarter backing a game, it feels like it takes a lot longer for a few different reasons that I can share with you. A lot of people don't think about this, but one of them is normally when you hear about a game being announced, by the time it's been announced, it's already well into development, maybe 75% done, if not more. And so the wait from the time you hear it's announced to the time it's in your hands is a lot shorter. However, when you're doing a Kickstarter campaign, when the game is quote unquote announced, it hasn't really begun development because the funding hasn't kicked in. So the amount of time from the point which the game is like announced to the time when it's in your hands is much, much greater. Also, I think there's a certain expectation of when you put your money down, you're following the project. You want to know there's a lot of anticipation built into that. So those are the two main reasons why I believe with crowdfunding campaigns, it certainly feels like the wait is much longer. In the case of Shantae, we were working as hard as we could, as quickly as we could, to bring that game to everybody. And as you know, these things take time.
Oh yeah. It's also things can go wrong on Kickstarter projects. Like,
they do, yeah.
It's like, well, about 2 weeks ago, we had a good friend of ours talking about their Kickstarter experience and how things kind of went askew. Thankfully, they corrected themselves and the project's back on track. But and yeah, it's like one of the biggest problems with Kickstarter projects can be scalability and stretch goals. Like, and so I suppose my question here is, how did you keep that focused? How did you integrate like all the stretch goals into Half Genie Hero?
That's a great question. So we were really focused on delivering the core game experience first and foremost. The stretch goals that we could incorporate quickly, we did. However, the initial release of the game is the main core experience, and then a lot of the stretch goals, as far as like different modes, playing different characters, we brought those on as DLC. So that was sort of our approach to not getting overwhelmed with trying to do so much at once. We had a really focused effort on this core game experience, and then later would supplement it with things like Pirate Queen's Quest, which is the mode where you're playing as Risky Boots, Shreds to the End, where you're playing as Sky, Bolo, and Roddy Tops, Shantae's friends, right, of course, and the costume pack, which was the last one to come out. So, and that one came out most recently, as you might know. So,
Right.
For those, it was the year after the game formally came out, we'd be working on them and getting them out and bringing them to players, so that we wouldn't be overwhelming ourselves on the main game experience and getting the initial game out the door.
And is Half Genie Hero complete? Like, is that all the content there is?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I certainly think it'd be interesting to see what else we do with it. But we came out with the ultimate edition of Shantae Half Genie Hero, which is actually a different SKU entirely. Has a different sort of menu, and it's all the experiences of the DLC built into one full game package. It is the best version of Shantae Half Genie Hero. I'm really proud of how that all came together, and it's really great to be able to dive in. And if one chooses to jump right into my favorite mode, which is the Pirate Queen's Quest, playing as Risky Boots, it's the most like Pirate's Curse, if you will, because of the pirate gear. We borrowed a lot of the pirate gear from Pirate's Curse and tried to bring that kind of gameplay experience into the Half Genie Hero engine.
And it makes sense, because I mean, if we're literally borrowing her stuff, then if she has her stuff, she should be able to use it about the same way.
Right. Yeah, we had that same thought.
Indeed. Well, I suppose the question is, what do you think you could do with Half Genie Hero at this stage?
I'm not sure. Like for me, it feels like a very complete experience. I want everyone to enjoy it as it is. As far as where it goes from here, or where Shantae goes from here, I would leave that to Matt Bozon to sort of speak to. And I'm eager to know as much as you are.
Indeed. I mean, well, I hope Shantae does come back sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Since
Likewise.
This is a franchise that is known for sometimes having, rather long gaps between entries in the series.
I agree.
I'm like, still, I don't see anything happening quite as expansive as, say, the original Game Boy Color release and Shantae's Risky's Revenge. Because
that was like, what,
yeah,
7 years, something like that.
Something like that. Well, there was a Shantae Advance game, but they couldn't find a publisher for it.
Right, yeah.
That's kind of the key there. Like, not only is Shantae so much more of an established franchise now, and I'm assuming a successful one,
right?
But, Wayforward isn't held to the whims of publishers like they were in the Game Boy Advance days. I'm not sure how successful a Kickstarter campaign would be in today's age, because, I mean, there's no getting around it. The Kickstarter well has been pretty poisoned, fairly or unfairly, but, people are a lot more skeptical of projects on that platform, and really crowdfunding in general, when it comes to video games. It's unfortunate, but I get it. Like, there have been games that under-delivered or just were massive fiascos.
Right.
I'm like, it might be up to the next crop of, quote unquote Kickstarter superstars, you know, like Bloodstained and Shenmue 3, Indivisible. I know that was Indiegogo, but that's still a highly anticipated crowdfunded project.
Still crowdfunding, and yeah, I'm excited about that one
I hope we
personally.
get some good ones.
Yeah.
Likewise.
So, right. So we are running low on time here, so just a couple more questions at this stage.
Sure.
I do want to bring you back because I think we have a lot more in the way of questions. I don't know how busy your August is.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, we can talk about that in a bit.
Sure.
But yeah. What else did you work on? When you weren't working on the Shantae games at this point in time.
There is another Shantae question mark game that is not super well known.
Okay.
However, I'm really proud of what we did. It's kind of funny. It's called Watch Quest Heroes of Time, and Shantae's in the game. It is a game, and it's available for Apple Watch as a platform. It was one of the first games that ever came out for Apple Watch. And so that one, I actually worked on that while we were just wrapping up just before we started wrapping up, I should say, the Shantae Half Genie Hero DLC. And it was there for the launch of Apple Watch as a platform. And in it's kind of like a passive RPG game that you play. And in this one, Bolo was actually the core character. And you.
I was going to say,
I'm
looking at the title art here, and who decided it was safe to give Bolo a sword?
So in this world, it's kind of like a. It's like it resembles the Shantae world, but it's a little bit turned on its head. And so, Bolo gets a sword in this one. Someone said, "Bolo, you can have a sword. It's going to be okay. What could go wrong?"
I imagine that person's dead now.
Who knows? But that being said, it had to be a good decision because I personally think that Watch Quest is as simple of an experience as it is. It's a lot of fun, and so I hope like one person out there will go download Watch Quest as a result of me bringing this up, because that would just make me so happy. It was such a simple and silly game experience that we put together, but it's surprisingly, when I say simple, I mean easy to play. There's a lot of depth there, so that was a really cool one. I'm really proud of it, and whenever people like remember it, I'm just very delighted. But yeah, so as far as like if you want to get really hardcore on the Shantae stuff, Watch Quest Heroes of Time. Shantae's there. You can play as her, and it's a very different experience. It'll revisit a lot of familiar Shantae characters and enemies, and yeah, so that's one of the ones that I worked on after Shantae Half Genie Hero.
If I had an Apple Watch, I'd check it out, but I don't.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think the only one here is a smartwatch, and mine's a Samsung Gear.
I hate watches in general, so the concept of an Apple Watch never really appealed to me.
It's not for everybody. In fact, I talked to a lot of people about it. I own Apple Watch, and it's not like having a cell phone where, okay, let's put it this way. You leave the house without your cell phone, you feel naked, right? It's like a weird thing. Like, oh, where's my phone? If you leave the house without your Apple Watch, it's not necessarily like oh my gosh, like what am I gonna do? It's just like one of those like nice to have things to me personally. So it's not like a necessity to me personally. Everyone's different though. I do love it as a product though. I enjoy it, and it's one of those things like you didn't know you needed it until you have it, and now it's like, oh, it's pretty nice. But yeah, of course, I don't feel like I'm missing something when I leave the house without it per se.
Makes sense. Like, and what was it like making a game for that device? I mean, how does that work even?
Yeah, it was really early on, before the device was even out. So a lot of it was like working on a computer simulator of the device, and then we had some of our staff visit like Apple to kind of, I guess, try it out or whatever. And they were able to kind of work on the actual unit for the first time. So working on the platform before it was even a platform that was released was a really interesting experience, and really cool to just be a part of something new and exciting. So Yeah, I'm trying to think like what other projects to bring up, and one I would like to mention is we did have an April Fool's joke that ran in 2013 because Wayforward, we're a funny company. We like to have fun, and every year we're kind of known for doing some sort of gag on April Fools. This one in particular, though, is one of our earlier ones. It was called Cat Girl Without Salad, and the idea was of that being that it was the game that combined all game genres into one. Now, of course, like how does that work? How would you make a game like that? It was a question that we asked ourselves after putting that goof out. But so many people were like, "When are you gonna make Cat Girl Without Salad a real game?" It was just meant to be like a joke, right? We were just having a little fun. So many people asked us about it that we had to consider, all right, how are we going to make this happen? We made a big promise here, a game that's every video game genre. Now we have to deliver on that promise. So being a director on that project was a great honor. I'm still really excited about it. I hope a lot of people will still get the chance to play this one. It's available on PC, and it was that one was funded by Humble for their Humble Bundle or Humble Monthly program. And it was available exclusively through that for a while, but through some means we're able to make it available as a PC download, which is still available to this day, I believe, on their Humble Trove service. And so that one, it was a side-scrolling shooter game where you played as the main character of Cat Girl Without Salad. Her name is Kibako, and she is a cat girl, and she has a gun arm, and when she collects gun cartridges, she will get different guns, and each gun is a different game genre. So the way we contended with this big promise of like every game genre was to have different guns that represent each game genre. So as you're playing the shooter, the game genre is changing as you pick up these different cartridges. And it's just so funny and out there. We had Christina V, that's the voice of Kibako. We have Lindsay Collins, Linsbot, as the art director and designer of the character, and just Adam Tierney, director Adam Tierney, is co-director on the project. His writing is so wacky and amazingly funny. All that came together. It was a really small team. All that came together to make just a really hilarious and unique experience that I certainly think is a really special game. I'd love to see more people check it out.
I think it's only on the Humble Bundle?
Yeah, I believe so.
Only on Humble.
Trove.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that might make for a bit of difficult access because there are people here who, if it's not on Steam, it's not on the PC.
I think they still do delivery through Steam on a lot of things. You just can't buy it separately, I think.
I'm just saying that there are people here who, if it's not on Steam, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. There's some hardcore Steam people. I get that too. I get it.
Yeah, I'm like, right. So unfortunately, we've just about run out of time at this juncture. But I would like to invite you back to the program on August 1st.
Sure. Yeah. Let's chat more about if we can make that happen. I'll have to look at my schedule. Yeah, I'd love to. You guys are awesome. You're a lot of fun. I'd love to chat more. So hopefully, everyone enjoyed today.
I definitely have some questions I didn't get to. So
yeah. So
okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So part 2 of this is coming in August.
Right on. Let's make it happen.
All right. So the week ahead, we don't have anything on Friday at this juncture. I don't think there's anything, but Sunday reviews, we will be reviewing Dead Pixels Adventures. I'm actually looking forward to this because I get the chance to talk about achievement spam games.
Yeah, we're not looking forward to it because it's a good game, because it's barely.
Yeah, it's a specific kind of thing, but more on that on Sunday. And we're also reviewing The House in Fata Morgana, A Requiem for Innocence, the prequel to the original. I'm going through it. Unfortunately, I've been downloading Red Faction remastered or remastered.
Yep, remastered.
And that was 25 gigs, so that took a bit of time. Like, it's not so much slow internet. It's my laptop has this weird thing where with Steam is sometimes it overloads and it stops downloading. You know, I've never been able to figure out why, but I know it's laptop based because my old laptop did that as well. Quirks. Anyway, coming next week, we've only got the one interview, but returning to the program is Carrie Shiru of Tiny Build.
Oh, I know her. Cool.
Like, indeed. We'll be talking about their E3 stuff. And I'm looking forward to it. You know, it was fun having her on the program last time. Like, and until Sunday, I wish you good gaming.